Hello, I'm Shane Rattenbury, an ACT Greens member for Kurrajong in the ACT and the Minister for Consumer Affairs. I gave a version of this speech to the Inaugural Australian Repair Summit last week, and I'd like to share the important issue of the right to repair to the online audience now. This is a really important issue and one that I'm very passionate about, both as a Minister for Consumer Affairs, but also as a Green and as an environmentalist. The summit had the very specific intent of engaging with government, policymakers and industry to cover detailed and thorny questions arising from the emergence of the right to repair movement in Australia, itself a response to ongoing and large-scale trends. But I think it's appropriate to start from a much wider angle in order to better prepare us for zeroing in on the nitty-gritty and perhaps even to suggest a guiding philosophical viewpoint. I'm actually talking about our essence as human beings. One of the universal attributes of the human species is our creativity, our inventiveness, our ingenuity. Throughout human history and prehistory, those have been intricate, connected things, both within individuals and across cultures and societies. You only have to look at ancient crafts like knitting. The earliest surviving pieces of knitting are several socks found in Egypt and dating back to between 1000 and 1300 AD. Now, when I look at these amazing 1,000-year-old socks, I'm struck not just by how inventive they are in a technical sense, like who had the first idea to use a pair of needles to create these endless interlocking loops? We simply have no idea. Was it someone just fiddling around with a piece of string and some sticks? And not even just by how practical and carefully thought out they are, with the proper heel and toe shaping and tapering calves and fine cotton yarn. I'm struck by how creative and how beautiful they are in a way that's entirely superfluous to their practical function. Yet this superfluous beauty is a common factor across a vast proportion of these kinds of artefacts. It suggests not just that knitting these socks was probably important to their creator, but that creativity and what you might call emotional ownership is an integral part of human ingenuity. We tend to take these kinds of intricate patterns for granted now, assuming a team of sock designers and complex industrial scale machinery. But back then, it would have been an act of personal artistry, combined with the practical inventiveness of knowing how to thread those different coloured strands on the inside of the sock so that they didn't spoil the pattern. There's a whole huge explosion of creativity and invention behind these socks. Again, we don't know how long, years or decades or centuries, it took to get from those first awkward loops on two sticks that we can imagine to flat, clumsy garments, to shaping and patterns like this. But it illustrates another element of the connected nature of human ingenuity, the way ideas spark from one person to the next, like batons passed in a relay, improved upon or reimagined with each pair of hands and eyes, from the first wooden wheels or simple canoes to an aircraft's retractable landing gear or a 400-metre long container ship. But there is a paradox at work in our modern civilization, thanks to thousands of years of this relay of ingenuity. Most of the stuff all of us use now, we couldn't make from scratch in a pink fit. We simply wouldn't know where to start. In that sense, our own inventiveness as a species has robbed us of ownership of our inventiveness as individuals. Yet surely such a fundamental human attribute as our creativity and ingenuity and our ownership of those things has to also be considered a fundamental human right, as important for us to access as the right to air and water and shelter and food. The right to tinker with our stuff, to get it fixed or changed or improved, to manage it how we want, to make it last as long as we can. The right to get it repaired. Which gets us to the point we've arrived at now. It's not only the complexity of current technology that robs individuals of the kind of connection to our things and the ownership of ingenuity that I've been talking about. It's corporate behaviour and existing gaps or imbalances in our laws. I'm sure I don't need to spend a lot of time detailing what is happening or why it's a problem from multiple perspectives. Proprietary service manuals that make it impossible for independent repair businesses to do their work. Companies that simply don't make available the replacement parts for their products. Warranties that are voided if a consumer or independent repairer so much as unscrews a backplate. As the ACT's Minister for Consumer Affairs for a number of years now, I've been working on this issue for quite some time, and as a political party, the Greens both federally and in the ACT have been aware of it for quite some time as well. Just now, I focused on the fundamental and rather abstract right of human beings to express and own their inventiveness, but specific consumer rights around products they've purchased are also crucial. As a matter of principle, consumers should be able to use an independent repairer or access the resources needed to repair a product themselves. Further, and very much a central concern of environmental and green groups worldwide, with our species now consuming far more of the world's resources than the planet can handle, preserving resources and reducing waste have become existential needs. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in Australia, growing 3 times as fast as other municipal waste. The average Australian household generates around 73 kilograms of e-waste annually, while globally the total figure is more than 50 million tonnes a year. We're not disposing of it properly, and we're squandering resources. Lithium, tellurium, copper, these will eventually run out. The deliberate shortening of a product's lifespan, or what's known as planned obsolescence, by refusing to supply component parts or discontinuing software updates needs to be countered. Companies and manufacturers might like it, but ordinary people hate it. They want to purchase a washing machine or a laptop knowing it will last many years and that it can be repaired. In my mind, these shortcomings are a fundamental market failure, and that's a central role for government, to step in where there's market failure and make sure that the system works for the benefit of consumers and not for the benefit of companies. The growth of grassroots efforts such as repair cafes speak to our hunger to move away from the throwaway culture that commercial interests have pushed us towards. The Bower, a registered charity committed to reuse and repair, now has 4 locations in Sydney and a whole range of activities from donation and collection services to repair cafes to an e-tool library and a tiny house building course focused on using recycled and reclaimed materials, extending the lifespan of all sorts of things in inspiring ways. We've seen some egregious conduct at the corporate level. As of February this year, American company John Deere was still failing to honour its agreement to voluntarily make its repair tools, software guides and diagnostic equipment available to ordinary farmers. The push for the right to repair is no longer simply happening at the grassroots level. Government recognition of the problem is building. Last month, the Australian Productivity Commission released its draft report assessing the need for right to repair laws in Australia, with a focus on whether consumers face any unnecessary barriers to repair that require a government policy response. The short answer, of course, is that most of us here today think they do face those barriers and a government policy response is required. The perspective of manufacturers does need to be considered, of course, but we also need to be a bit cynical, where there's a push from certain companies to treat this purely as a matter of security and intellectual property protection, when in fact to a large degree their motivation is simply rent-seeking. We also have justification for being cynical about corporations that promise to police themselves. I'm not going to name any particular companies, but there have been examples of those companies voluntarily undertaking to make software and repair manuals available, and then arguing that this undertaking meant that right to repair legislation was therefore somehow unnecessary. Years later, the problem continues, and we can see that these companies were simply kicking the can down the road. In the ACT, we're already a bit ahead of the Productivity Commission's report in our own thinking. In fact, I'm quite proud to say that our small jurisdiction is the one that has pushed this issue along, including precipitating the Commission's report. As the ACT Minister for Consumer Affairs, I took this issue to the Consumer Affairs Ministers' meeting, arguing for an examination of potential policy options to address the issue. And from that meeting came the formal referral to the Productivity Commission as the recommended outcome from all of the ministerial colleagues, and I was very pleased to get support from the other states and territories to take this initiative forward. Now, as noted, this is only a draft report from the Productivity Commission, and I'm sure you're aware there is an opportunity to make submissions towards the report's final version. For anyone who doesn't know, the deadline for this is the 23rd of July, so hop to it if you want to make a contribution. The report rightly notes the complexity of these issues and the need to balance conflicting interests. I do urge anybody, especially those with particular areas of specialisation or unique insights, to make a submission if you've got the time. Meanwhile, here in the ACT, we already have new initiatives ready to launch as a result of the work we've done to date. In August, consistent with the Productivity Commission's recommendation, the ACT's new enforceable conciliation will commence. On its own, this is already a positive outcome, and if it can be supported by new legislation, such as the Productivity Commission's recommendations for a super complaint mechanism, and for the ACCC to develop and publish estimates for how long certain products can reasonably be expected to last, in other words, pushing back on planned obsolescence, it should become a powerful tool for consumers and consumer advocacy groups. One of the most significant areas that needs the appropriate balance is the current clash between intellectual property rights and the right of consumers and independent repairers to access repair information. On the one hand, manufacturers consider some of this information to be proprietary in nature, and making it more accessible could impact on the willingness of companies to invest in innovation, particularly in areas such as video and online gaming. In some areas, however, there can also be safety and other concerns resulting from the use of information by unskilled repairers. That said, there surely needs to be some kind of positive obligation on manufacturers to make repair supplies and information available to third parties. The Productivity Commission is specifically calling for input on the concept of this positive obligation. There also needs to be an overhaul of the language used in warranty agreements to prevent a warranty being voided, or in some cases, to prevent the consumer from wrongly believing that the warranty will be voided if they use an alternative repairer. I think this is a common problem for many people who do have that impression. Now, when it comes to e-waste, various Australian governments have addressed concerns through product stewardship schemes such as the National Television and Computer Recycling Scheme, or the NTCRS. As the situation stands, however, there is little incentive for these schemes to do anything other than recycle collected e-waste. This is resulting in otherwise functional products being dismantled and destroyed for their component materials, rather than being put to higher value uses through repair and resale. The Commission is seeking evidence on whether product labelling standards would provide net benefits to the community, and how the government and industry might jointly approach such a scheme. The Commission has also recommended that the Australian Government should amend the NTCRS to include repair and reuse as an option. Now, overall, I think the Productivity Commission has done a good job, and I genuinely thank them for their ongoing effort on this really important and potentially transformative issue. I will make one additional comment about their draft, though, and their current recommendations. And that is the fact that their analysis and recommendations seem quite focused on the end product and potential solutions for consumers at the end of the line. That is, what can a consumer do when they inevitably have a product that lacks the longevity or transparency that they deserve? That's fine, but how can we change this paradigm of consumers receiving such products in the first place? How can we stop manufacturers making the products that leave the onus on the consumers to seek end-of-the-line solutions? I would like to see more work and more focus on the beginning of the production line, not the end. What obligations should we be placing on the producers of these things we use to meet certain standards before they can be sold, imported, or manufactured in Australia? Standards around transparency and repairability, qualities that should just be a default for consumers. Of course, it's a thorny area in this free market world, but I think that manufacturers need further scrutiny, probably more regulation, even if it is just for certain key products where repairability and transparency standards have truly dropped away. Campaigns around the world have identified some of these, things like farm equipment, smartphones, and major electrical and white goods. As I said before, I don't think we can leave it up to the manufacturers or the market. This is a market failure, and there is a role for government to fix it. Let me now circle back briefly to where I started, the socks. It is easy in this kind of area to get lost in the niceties of corporate responsibility and consumer legislation. That is important. That's our job. But as we work on those things today and in the future, let's try to remember when we can this broader idea that human ingenuity is an essential part of our nature, and that all human beings have a right to express and use it. I think this organising idea, this slightly philosophical concept. I think it will help us navigate this space more thoughtfully and come up with solutions that work, solutions that are good for consumers and solutions that will be good for the planet.